So, Chris, one of my most used apps on this phone is now TikTok.
Yes,
Getting down with the kids.
Yeah, you tell me frequently about your adventures into that area of cyberspace.
But if I was a government minister, I'd be deleting it from this phone, wouldn't I?
If that's your work phone, yes.
Because they've got a new rule.
So they got a new rule in line with quite a few kind of Western governments and kind of public institutions of being a little bit sceptical about TikTok, about what happens to the data on it, the kind of does it end up revealing to its Chinese owners and therefore potentially the Chinese government. So goes the fear that they either know what's going on your phone or know where you are. So, yeah, it will no longer be on government phones. But you have some government ministers like Grant Shapps who was TikToking this afternoon saying, I'm going nowhere on TikTok because I do it all on my personal phone.
But unfortunately, he used a copyright infringing clip of a Hollywood film, which we can't show you. So you'll just have to, I don't know, maybe go on TikTok yourselves and look at that. It does, however, mean that we will still get great content like this, though, from Matt Hancock, because, of course, he's no longer a government minister, so he can TikTok to his heart's content about all sorts of nonsense.
Thanks for all the back. Yes, the shirts have been a bit creased, so here goes.
Talking about other apps, I mean, if the government banned the use of WhatsApp on official phones, things would just grind to a halt round here, wouldn't they?
Newsrooms would grind to a halt, government would grind to a halt, and acres, perhaps even 23 hours a day, would suddenly become available to do other things.
Oh, speaking of which, the boss of Newscast says, get on with this episode. Your wish is our command.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Chris in the studio.
Last time we were sat here, we were with Ken Clarke, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, wading through the budget, which had about kind of 300 things in it, and the Office of Budget Responsibility report about the public finances, which had about another 300 things in it. Now that you've had a time to sort of sleep on all of those things with them under your pillow, what are your thoughts?
So we've been on day 2 today, Thursday, of the budget. The big picture thing is that some of the think tanks, you know, Westminster's brains beyond government, have been crunching through it, and they've concluded what many a newscaster will know as the kind of bleeding obvious, really, but they present it in the spreadsheets and all the rest of it, which is that times are really tough for people, that wages are squeezed, that living standards are squeezed, that household income is squeezed and will be for a while, that the tax burden is the highest it's been in yonks and yonks and yonks, and is likely to be for a while as well. And then I think, as we were discussing on the last edition of the podcast, a lot of the budget was quite kind of nerdy and in the weeds. There was the discussion around childcare in England that we talked about. There's this row that's going on about pensions for very well-paid doctors and others to try and encourage them to stay at work and not retire and spend time in the garden centre or the golf course. And actually, since then, the whole political discussion has moved on a bit with the whole announcement we were just talking about TikTok, and then this hoped for within government and within some of the unions resolution to some of the NHS disputes and strikes that we've seen in the last few months.
More on that in a second, but let's just catch up with what Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, said on BBC Breakfast this morning on Thursday when he was asked about the fact that the tax burden in the UK is going to be the highest, well, it's been for ages.
For a while, the burden of tax is going to be higher, but Conservatives cut taxes when we can. And only last year, for the first time ever in this country, you can earn £1,000 a month without paying a penny of tax or national insurance. That's a Conservative reform which lightens the burden on some of our lowest paid.
Now, Chris, you mentioned this, the sort of resolution to the long-running dispute about pay between the government and lots of NHS workers in England, which on Thursday tea time sort of reached a denouement, to use a really pretentious word.
That is a great word. Resolution potentially.
Well, a resolution of the negotiations they were having.
Yes. So lots of the health unions been talking to the Department of Health for a couple of weeks now. They've been moving towards reaching some sort of arrangement pretty much since Christmas. And they have come out and said that, yes, they have reached a mutual agreement between the leaders of the unions, and most of them, and Department of Health, of a 5% pay rise for the next financial year starting in April, plus a one-off payment that won't be, to use the jargon, be consolidated. So it literally is one-off. It won't be built into future pay settlements. And the leaderships of most of the unions are recommending to their members that they should back it. Compromise on both sides, because the government spent ages saying we're not reopening this year's pay settlement. And they can technically say they haven't done that, but they are bunging more money towards paying this year as far as pay is concerned. And a pay settlement that's not as high as some of the unions wanted for next year, but is higher than the Treasury was saying a few weeks ago was affordable. So compromise, prevailing wind, pointing in the direction of sorting stuff out, but the members get to decide. So we're not quite there yet, and there's still a junior doctors dispute, and there's still the National Education Union who are not yet in a place where they want to sign up to a deal. So you can kind of see where things are going with the strikes, but it's not quite over yet.
And it might not feel very over if you've got a very, very postponed appointment as a result of all this industrial action. Right, loads and loads to chew over with our first guest of this episode. It is the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Hello.
Hello, great to be here.
This is a nice tradition we've got going now, where there's something big happens in the House of Commons fiscally, then you come into the studio and we talk about it. It's great.
Yes, I think I was here quite a lot last year because we had 4 budgets and mini budgets during the course of the year, some of which were more disastrous than others, if I remember correctly.
Anyway, right, you've reacted to a lot of news this week, but just one last bit of breaking news. This strike, the deal that's being done on the NHS strikes, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I really hope that this does resolve the industrial disputes that we've seen over the last few months. You'll remember last year I was saying that the government needed to get round the table with the public sector workers and with the trade unions. The government said, no, we're not going to do that. The offer's the offer. Eventually they did get round the table, and I very much hope now this is the end to the industrial unrest.
So if you hope that it is, that reads across to suggesting that you want the members of the trade unions to vote for it. That's Labour's position now, is it?
That is their decision. I'm certainly not going to recommend to nurses or ambulance workers what they decide to do. But I do hope that this industrial unrest can come to an end. And
but if you hope it comes to an end, that means they've got to back it.
Well, it means they've got to come to a compromise, and I think a couple of the unions have said they will recommend it to their workers, but that's up to them to make that decision, and I certainly wouldn't want to make a recommendation to them one way or another. That's their decision.
Does it seem to you like a reasonable kind of middle ground compromise?
Well, it was always going to take compromise on both sides, and that's why I think it was so frustrating last year when the government said, we've made our offer, we're not going to reopen any of it, and everyone said, but you've got to, because that is how disputes are resolved. And eventually they did do exactly that. But, you know, if they had have got round the table earlier on, we could have avoided all of this and the disruption, particularly in our hospitals and to operations and procedures and appointments. You know, we could have not had all of that and been in a better state because of it.
Let's talk about the budget. What is so bad about letting people save as much as they want into their pensions over their lifetime? Because that's what the government's now going to let people do.
Because it requires a big tax break. So usually when we earn money, we are taxed on it at 20 or 40, or in the case of some people, 45%. Now, what the government are proposing is that you can put in as much money over your lifetime tax-free into a pension. And the cost of that and the cost of the changes they've brought in this week is just over £1 billion. And the changes that they've made will only benefit the people with the 1% biggest pension savings in the country. And at the same time, we know that many people, well over 1 million, have reduced what they're saving into pensions because they're struggling with the cost of living. And taxes for the average family from April are going to go up by an average of £650. So I just don't think the right priority this week was an across-the-board a tax break for the top 1%. Of course, we need to resolve the doctors' issue. And again, Wes Streeting and Labour have been saying since last September there needs to be a fix for doctors so that they work more overtime and they don't retire so early because of the punitive pension charges.
So doctors
it didn't need to be for everybody.
So doctors could have better pensions or better tax treatment for their pensions than everyone else. That would be
there's
okay.
already a fix for judges, so this wouldn't be just unique actually to doctors. There's already special arrangements for judges' pensions, and you could make a fix for doctors because that is where there's a big problem. We know because of the lack of NHS workforce planning over years now, there aren't enough doctors in the health service, and as a result, there are 7 million people waiting for procedures. That has got to be cleared. If we can get more doctors to do more operations more quickly, that would help resolve that issue. But you do not need to do this for everybody that's got £1 million plus in pension schemes.
But if there was a relatively easy fix that was more sector specific, that from the government's perspective at a time of squeezed budgets would save them money, why would they have not done that?
Well, the Chancellor said, good question, Chris, but probably one you should put to the Chancellor, not to me. The Chancellor said in his statement yesterday that since becoming Chancellor, he has decided that this is a bigger issue than just doctors, and he wants to fix this across the board. Now, look, more than half of the people who have got £1 million plus in pensions, I believe, are in the private sector. Some of them might be able to save huge amounts in pensions. If, for example, you build up a pension pot of £2 million, it means that you'll pay £250,000 less in tax than under the arrangements that exist today. I just don't think that is the right priority.
But if this means that relatively quickly the 58-year-old cancer surgeon is treating you, me, Adam, any newscaster watching or listening and not on the golf course, maybe that patient isn't going to worry about the whole business of taxes and pensions. They're just getting somebody who is an expert in what they do, who otherwise would have taken themselves out of the workplace.
Well, I think you can pretty quickly resolve this issue for doctors. As I say, there is a scheme on the table that already exists for judges. We've been calling for this for months. It's not something that the government just discovered yesterday, that there was a problem with operations building up, just a problem discovered yesterday that doctors were disincentivised for working extra hours. They've had plenty of time to resolve this, and this is the best they've got. It's not good enough.
Why should, though? I mean, why should a judge or a doctor have a better tax arrangement as far as their pensions are concerned than somebody in the private sector?
Look, there is a particular issue around doctors at the moment, and we've got to clear this backlog.
Sure, but
and
how
that
is it
means
fair?
a particular
How is
fix.
it that? How would it be? Why is
It's
it
about
fair?
whether it's a good use of taxpayers' money. And I think it is a good use of taxpayers' money at the moment to get doctors to do overtime and to choose to stay in work a bit longer than they're currently doing so. So we would make that fix because it's good value for money for taxpayers. And in the end, that's what the Chancellor has to make a decision on. So I would back that, but not this
somebody
across
working in the
board.
city who earns a fortune, pays a fortune in tax, a big part of the British economy, they're not as worthy of that saving and they should pay more tax.
Well, it's in the end, it's about political choices. If you've got £1 billion to make a permanent tax cut with, which is what the Chancellor did yesterday, you have to decide where that money should go. I personally think that if you're going to be reducing tax burdens for people, it should be those on more modest incomes who are facing, as I said before, an increase in their taxes, both because of the fiscal drag, people being dragged into paying higher taxes because the tax brackets haven't kept line with inflation, and also because council tax is going to be going up in April. So you've got to make choices as a politician, and my choice would not be this tax break for the 1%.
I'm glad you mentioned fiscal drag, one of my favourite buzzwords around this time of year. Yeah, exactly. Easily pleased. What's Labour's position on that? Would you be increasing those income tax rate thresholds with inflation every year if you were Chancellor? No more of these freezes, which then raise loads of money further down the line.
Look, I want taxes on working people to be as low as they can, but the public finances at the moment are in a real mess. And so, look, I can't make a commitment to just reverse this because the money is just not there in the public finances. It's why I've said that my number one priority, and Keir Starmer set out the missions of an incoming Labour government, the number one mission is to have the highest sustained growth in the G7, because it is only through growth that you've got the money to improve living standards, keep taxes low, and have money for public services.
So you're not saying, oh, when I'm Chancellor, I promise income tax thresholds will go up with inflation every year.
Well, I would like
no
them
more
to.
fiscal drag. You'll abolish fiscal drag.
Adam, I would like to be able to say that, but that requires there being the money available, and that requires growing the economy, which is why I've put so much focus on the plan for growth. So.
Yeah. When you were on Laura's show on Sunday, or a few Sundays ago, I lose track of which
Yes,
week it is. It's like,
Sunday.
oh, was it only this Sunday? Wow, what a long week. And I noticed some people on social media picking up on something you'd said, which was this pledge you'd made at a conference a few years ago. And I remember being there, and it was something like 28 billion a year on green technology and getting to net zero. But now you're saying, oh, if the public finances allow. So is that 28 billion definitely going to happen every year under a Labour government? Or is it only if the economy is growing to a certain extent and you can, quote unquote, pay for it?
That's what I said in the conference in 2021.
okay.
I set out the fiscal rules that an incoming Labour government would abide by, and that would be getting the grip of day-to-day spending, getting debt down as a share of GDP, and then subject to that, investing in the things that will grow our economy. But if I look at the public finance numbers, there is the room to make those investments. And actually, look, a good chancellor has got to know when to say no. And I'm absolutely willing and happy to say to people, as I've just said on the fiscal drag issue, I can't promise to do everything I want to do straight away. I can't make spending commitments without saying where the money's going to come from. But also a good chancellor needs to know when to say yes to good investments that can boost our productivity and growth. And I do take inspiration from what President Biden is doing in the US to boost investment and growth into the US, turning the Rust Belt into an electric vehicle belt, attracting good manufacturing jobs to the US, getting that inward investment. And my real worry is that the UK is losing out in this global race for the jobs and industries of the future, which is why actually that Green Prosperity Plan that I announced in September 2021 is even more relevant and even more important today because other countries are now stealing a march on us.
How often do you say no to your colleagues relative to when you say yes?
Well, maybe get there in it to ask them that. But look, I think my colleagues respect me. I hope they respect me for it because look, the easiest thing would be, do we want more money in transport? Do we want more money in schools, in childcare, in the NHS? So many things are not working properly. Of course, I want to make investments in our public services. Of course, I want to reduce the tax burden on working people. But Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng last September, and we spoke about this at the time, made a load of unfunded tax cuts and they crushed the economy. I'm not going to make either unfunded tax cuts or unfunded spending commitments because that is the way to ruin. And I will always have at the heart of my economic strategy and policies that rock of economic and financial stability.
But that's the fundamental truth, isn't it? That if you guys are in government in a year, 18 months' time, what you're going to inherit, where we have a tax burden where it is generationally high, public spending where it is generationally high, the room for manoeuvre in terms of what you guys, or indeed if the Conservatives were in, what they could do to do things that are significantly different is really constrained. I mean, in terms of what you can promise that would be substantially different given where taxing and spending is.
It's absolutely true to say there are big constraints on what an incoming Labour government will be able to do. We might not be able to do everything we want as quickly as we want. Keir and me have both said that. But look, politics is about choices.
That, isn't it?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples of different choices that I would have made if it had been a Labour budget. I've already spoken about growth and the importance of those industries of the future. But if you look, for example, at what's happening with energy bills and the profits of energy companies, it was January 2022 that I first called for a windfall tax on the big profits that the energy giants are making. At the time, Rishi Sunak as Chancellor resisted that and said it was the wrong policy. Eventually, they came in with an energy profits levy, but it had so many holes in it, it meant that Shell didn't pay a penny of that energy profits levy last year. So I've said that Labour would fix the holes in that, get rid of those loopholes, and we believe that could raise another £10 billion, and we would use that to help people with the cost of living. The government, I welcome the fact the government said yesterday that they will freeze gas and electricity bills for a further 3 months. But instead of funding that through tax receipts or through borrowing, they could have funded it by asking the energy giants who are making windfalls of war to pay more. So that is a different choice that Labour would make compared with the Conservatives.
A 10 billion net kind of inflow from something like that must have negative consequences, though, in terms of how the UK is perceived internationally or seen as an attractive destination for business, because that's one heck of a lot of money.
Well, it would only be taking the tax rate up to the level applied in Norway, and it would only reduce the profits to where they were before Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Look, all of these profits, these excess profits, are the windfalls of war. They're only being enjoyed because Putin illegally invaded Ukraine. The other side of the coin of those huge profits are the huge prices that are being applied to all of our bills, and also the bills of businesses, whether they're small businesses or energy-intensive businesses in steel or ceramics, etc. So that is just a different choice that the Conservatives resist, but Labour would do. So I recognise there are constraints, absolutely, but then you have to decide who to shield and who to ask to pay a bit more.
You know what I've just remembered? We were talking about fiscal drag a few minutes ago. I've just remembered from a conversation I was having the other day with someone, the lesser-known sibling of fiscal drag, moral hazard.
Moral hazard.
Yes.
Well, a few years ago, that was the big sister. Yeah, exactly, that was the big sister.
Somebody
Taking us back to 2008.
Yeah, somebody mentioned it in the context of the whole row about this Silicon Bank on the west coast of America. And all
Well,
that.
that's the argument that's made, that you can't bail out someone because...
That you have to allow things to fail.
Yes.
Would you give the government credit for wrapping up that whole Silicon Valley Bank thing over a weekend and quite quickly and at no cost to the taxpayer?
I certainly welcome the fact that HSBC have taken on those clients, and I hope that that's the end of the matter. I have been following what's been happening at Credit Suisse this week. Hopefully the Swiss government, hopefully now that the Swiss government has stepped in with a huge deal with Credit Suisse, have calmed things down. It certainly looks like that for now. But we have said to the government they do need to look at the impact of rapidly rising interest rates on financial stability.
No, we've got to let you go because I think there's a takeaway curry waiting for you at home. But we're allowed to reveal that.
Which I'm very much looking forward to. I think we discussed what I was going to drink when I got home last time I was on your show. So
all the food groups.
What do you wash a curry down with?
Now you ask, Chris. A glass of red wine, I think.
Marvellous.
Plain naan or garlic naan?
Plain.
Garlic.
Because it depends what you're doing the next day, I think.
Yeah, no, it'd be garlic for me.
Right, and let's do a food podcast. They're very popular. Rachel Reeves, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed it.
Right, shall we go back to where we actually started that conversation with Rachel Reeves, which is the deal that's been struck between the Department for Health and lots of the unions representing NHS workers who've been on strike over the last few months. So that's nurses, paramedics, all sorts of people who work in hospitals who basically aren't doctors, and other bits of the NHS as well. We can chat now to somebody who's been at the heart of those negotiations. It's Sarah Gorton, who's head of health at the union Unison. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, nice to be here.
Now, I remember the days of the Brexit negotiations. They were quite physically tiring for the people involved in them. Lots of kind of late night pizzas and stuff. Has that been your experience of these negotiations?
Well, no pizzas, but lots and lots of late nights. It has been, it's been quite an intensive process, really fascinating. And I'm sure that at some point after I've slept, some of it will seem like fun, but it kind of definitely stretched the sort of robustness of the relationships on all sides, I think.
Oh, really? That sounds like there might have been some table thumping.
Not table thumping, no. I mean, remember that the health sector in particular is dominated by trade unions that are full of female members. And we had a lot of women negotiators in the room. And in fact, just thinking about our trade union side, the vast majority of us were women. You know, when we walk into those rooms, you know, there were 7 of us on our side negotiating from the health trade unions, and we know that we're representing 1.3 million health workers. And you know, you name checked quite a few of the groups that got lots of the airtime during the dispute, the nurses and paramedics. But actually, this is about the whole health team. And, you know, on picket lines up and down the country, there have been cleaners, healthcare assistants, porters, dietitians, physiotherapists. You know, this is the whole health team. You know, very recently, the most recent batch of strike mandates we've got included workers in the NHS blood and transplant service, you know, a really vital service that often goes unnoticed. So I think we take our responsibilities to talk up for all of those people very seriously.
Isn't the truth here that sort of both sides have budged, there's been compromise, and that's how we've ended up where we are, where both sides in a private negotiation that has to be presented publicly have to get to a place where either side can say, look, we were right all along, we had to do what we did, our approach was pragmatic, and we think this is a victory.
Well, it's the art of negotiation, isn't it? That everybody walks away feeling a little bit disgruntled. So there are definitely things that I can look at in this package and say it could have been better, it could have been fairer. The lump sum, if you look at the way the lump sum is constructed, it's a decent chunk of cash. It represents an additional. I think it's heading around £3 billion worth of extra investment in the health workforce, which is not to be sniffed at. But when you look at the payments, they're decent sums of money. So stretching from just over £1,600 to nearly £4,000. And with most of the registered occupations getting over £2,000, that is a considerable sum. But you look at the way it's constructed, and in a cost of living crisis, a lot of people would look at that and say, well, why are those figures not going the other way round?
Have you demanded guarantees from the government that they don't pay for this by cutting money from other bits of the NHS so that the sums add up for them?
Well, that was clear in the negotiations that there was no intention to cut health services in order to pay for this.
What
but I
counts
think
as a health service, though? Somebody in government was saying to me,
exactly.
we won't cut quote unquote frontline services, but it seems to me that's quite a fuzzy concept as to exactly what that is.
Exactly, and I think that the devil will be in the detail, won't it?
Sarah, you were talking about the stamina required on all sides for the kind of longevity of these negotiations. What was the latest at night that you ended up working until? It's sort of in the room or digitally in the room negotiating with the government?
Well, the talks were constructed with a range of different types of sessions. So, it was a really interesting process, and we were using the nice conference rooms at the top of the Department of Health, which used to be the Secretary of State's office,
With the CCTV camera.
with the camera, and
The sight of the snog.
and there was no snogging as far as I witnessed. But they're really, really nice rooms, really well set up. And so we had plenary sessions that were chaired by the Secretary of State, normally 2 or 3 of those a day, to cover off, like the points in progress where, we'd have updates on where we'd got to with particular
Were you
parts
over there
of the
at gone midnight?
Not gone midnight. Last night it was very, very late, but not quite gone midnight. It was very late when I got home, but didn't leave after midnight any night. But yeah, certainly my family have not seen much of me. I've not been very much help with the GCSE revision this week.
And what would be how would you describe Steve Barclay?
He was very, very energetic. You talked about stamina. He's clearly somebody with lots of energy.
Did you say he uses stamina?
I'd not thought about that, but yeah, it's a good. I wouldn't say ooze. I wouldn't say ooze in any context, really. Don't like that word, particularly not when you connect it with any kind of individuals. Individuals oozing is probably a bit icky. But he was very energetic, and he was obviously very committed to. I sort of expected that the meetings would be that he would delegate that role to the NHS employers, who the department kind of. They contract them to deliver that kind of bargaining for the health service. So it was quite surprising to me that he was going to take personal responsibility.
Admirable from his perspective, do you think?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask the employers and figure out what they would have given us and see whether we got a better deal.
Well,
yes, still negotiating even when you've agreed a deal.
Well, I suppose you've now got to negotiate with your members because you're recommending that they should vote for it in the next couple of weeks. And I suppose there might be people who've got at one end questions and other people at the other end going, actually, I would have liked some more, because actually it's still not really keeping up with inflation, even with an inflation plus pay increase for next year. Anyway, Sarah, we'll let you have a well-earned rest.
Thank you very much.
And if you've had a Rachel Reeves-style curry alongside this episode of Newscast, I hope you enjoyed it and this podcast. That's all. Bye.
I'm off for a korma. Bye.
A korma? Yeah.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.